Hi everyone, thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to join you today. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Um, and we will get going. I'm here to talk about the storytelling springboard. So, how you can use storytelling to connect with consumers in a chaotic world. And I think if we could just pop back to the opening slide, that would be super. Um, and then we'll get going from there. Wonderful, thank you. So here we are. And if we could pop to the next slide, actually, thank you. We'll start there. The thank you. So storytelling. I think we hear about it all the time. We all love a good story. Um, and I'll specify a good story there. Nobody likes a bad story, obviously, but we all love a good story. That's why we read books. That's why we go to the movies. It's why we watch television. And it's now, of course, in our daily lives, why and how we consume and share our own stories on social media as well. Stories make the world go round, and we all know a good story when we hear one, right? Next slide, please. So stories really are the currency of human experience. And I just want to start by saying that I think we talk so much about storytelling in marketing and in communications these days. But I want to just level set for a minute before we dive into what a good story looks like and how that can help you with your sustainability initiatives. And just go back to the fact that this is indeed the earliest and most fundamental form of human communication. Stories are the fabric of our lives. They're how we communicate, how we connect, how we relate and engage, how we preserve and share valuable information. They're how we make ourselves laugh and sometimes bring us to tears. They really are the currency of human emotion and experience. So if you think all the way back, well, we can't think all the way back, we weren't there, but from cave paintings to Instagram and TikTok, stories are the connection between us all. And the same, of course, is true that stories are the connection between our companies and our brands and our daily lives. And I'm going to interchange a little bit the word consumer and the word we as we go through this, because we are all consumers. We're consumers of goods and we're consumers of information. So I think it can be easy sometimes to talk about consumers as if they are separate to us and other than us in some way. And I think it's important to keep ourselves in this mix as we think about how we want to engage and how we want to deliver our own brand stories. So from oral tradition all the way through, as we've said now, to TikTok, the age of TikTok and Instagram. This is how we understand history. This is the way we learn. This is the way we share. And this is the way we tell each other what it means to be part of a social group, part of a family, part of a culture, part of an organization. And it's the way we explain to customers how and what it means to be part of a brand and a brand community as well. So take a minute here and think of a good story that you've heard recently, or any story that's memorable, one that has stayed with you. Maybe one that you've retold. Maybe you have a story you love to tell, whether that's a work story, a family story. But think about that story for a minute and why it has stayed with you. What makes it memorable? What makes it something you want to retell? And then think for a second of all of the fast food stories that you may have consumed on social media recently if you're a social media user. Think about how many of those pass across in front of our eyes every day, and think about how many of those you actually remember, And we'll come back to that in a second. But next slide, please. We receive lots of stories every day. We receive a lot of new information every day, and much of it in the form of stories. And you can see here on this slide some very recent stories about happenings in the world and, of course, in Turkey directly. We consume 34 gigabytes or 100,000 words every day during our leisure time alone, not counting work. So that's more than 85,000 hours of television programming around the world, produced by TV stations around the world. And this is not counting things like YouTube, which uploads 6,000 plus hours of video every hour. So I share all this with you to posit the first question, I think maybe something that troubles many of us as communicators. And that is, does storytelling matter now? And certainly does sustainability storytelling matter now? Look at these headlines. Look at the things happening in the world. Consumers are overloaded. We have lots competing for our attention and our mind share. And so I think it's worth stopping to ask, why does storytelling matter? Because as a communicator, I think it really does. So if we go to the next slide, let's just level set a little bit by the numbers about why this is so important and why this really is the window and the point of connection for your brand and your sustainability story with your consumers. So we have here some data to start us out and set the foundation for why this matters. We have research showing 20% of young people already think it's too late to fix the climate crisis. 88% of consumers don't automatically trust a brand that claims to be sustainable. And I'm going to flag that to you. I think that's important as you think about how you go about storytelling. 17% of consumers will discourage friends and family from buying products if they feel environmental claims are overstated. 55% want companies to explain the sustainability credentials of their products compared to alternatives. If we flip to the next slide, a few more blockades in terms of consumer engagement and purchase decisions around sustainability. Affordability, of course, is top of the spectrum here, but access, lack of clarity, and lack of trust hold a significant position here in terms of consumers' barriers, not only to engaging with sustainability as part of a brand, but also then into the influence or the level of influence sustainability may have on a purchase decision. So if we flip to the next slide, it's not all doom and gloom, and there is some really good news here. We've got 93% of consumers who've maintained or increased sustainability purchases through 2022, so most recent data. Products marketed as sustainable have grown nearly 3 times faster. And brands with more sustainable products in their lineup enjoy more loyalty from their customers. We also can see here that most people are influenced by a company's environmental record when they're deciding on a purchase or who to buy from. And 18% always take an environmental record into account if they're making a recommendation to a friend. So these are not all massive numbers that I've shared here with you. But I think it's important to ground this conversation around what good sustainability storytelling looks like, with some data and a bit of a real picture here. I think it's very easy to think, I'm going to go and tell some stories about how sustainable my brand is, and that will help engage with consumers. But as you can see here, there's a healthy degree of skepticism in the market at the moment. There's a degree of climate fatigue from consumers. And of course, that's not helped by headlines. That's not helped by real world tragedies and crises unfolding around us. For many of you on this call today, the aftermath of the earthquake in Turkey is very, very real and very, very present. And I know that that's also affecting things like your own company, your own companies, your own work, and to be very candid, your own budgets and scope as well to do things. Healing and recovery are top of the priority list for many and most of you. I think that also, before we move into this next part of the presentation, it's important to talk about the fact that when we talk about storytelling, we're not talking about making things up. So oftentimes we refer to stories as something fictional. But by stories here, we're really talking about anecdotes and tales and accounts that can share insight into your brand and your purpose and your values. And we can have the next slide. Sorry, I'm talking and I'm not asking to change the slide here, but a good story is a springboard for connecting your values, your purpose, and your sustainability credentials with the real world that consumers live in. So this is about putting sustainability into context and doing so in ways that make sense for your audience and your local audience. So our theme, of course, this year is regenerating local, and I'll touch on how important that is for storytelling and good communication in a moment. If we flick to the next slide, however, I do want to take a moment and just lay down this definition here for sustainability storytelling. This is the sharing of a tale, an account, or an anecdote that shows your audience something about your purpose, your values, your products. It elicits an emotional response, and it makes your sustainability efforts accessible. In other words, it brings your why to life. So if you're familiar with the very popular work of Simon Sinek, Start With Why. This is the fundamental rule, of course, of communication. Why are you doing this? I've got this screenshot here from Allbirds, who was one of the first companies to put a carbon label. They make shoes, and to put a carbon label on their shoes. They have a very strong sustainability ethos. If you flip over to their website, this is one of the first things you see. This is their brand story and their origin story about how and why they started Allbirds. They use merino wool from New Zealand sheep as one of their major materials. So that's just to explain the image you see before you there. I want to get now into our first real example, because as we go through, in the spirit of showing, not telling, I want to share with you some examples of what good storytelling can look like, and also to offer you some examples that show you it can look like many things. So I think all of us are dealing at the moment, on top of everything else, with budget constraints driven by everything from the energy crisis and political situations that are, of course, driving up costs and disrupting supply chains and doing all sorts of things. And so I think one of the takeaways I'd like you to have as we go through this is to be thinking about how you can share good sustainability stories from your brand, share good insight from your brand, and that it doesn't always need to look like an Oscar-winning Academy Award production. It can, as you'll see, be as simple as a blog post. In this case, if we can flick to the next slide, and I'm hoping that the link will work here. I'd like to show you, and hopefully the sound will come through. I'd like to show you a brief clip from Veha Sneakers, and this is their origin story. This is their why story. And this is told by the founder. I don't think the volume's working, but that's okay. This is the story narrated directly by the founders of the company. So Veha does not advertise, and again has a very strong sustainability ethos. And this is their why. This is how they came to found the company. So we can stop there with this. I'd love to show you the whole thing. And I think if you have time, it is about 9 minutes long. It's a really good example. It's a really good thing to go and watch. As you can see, even in the first few seconds of this video, this is personal. It's narrated personally. It addresses the big picture why, but it does so in a very real, people-led and human way. And I want to come back to that because that really is, if we flip to the next slide, the power of a good story. Brand sustainability stories that inform, educate, entertain, inspire, provoke, engage, throw some other words in there if you would like. But brand sustainability stories that do some of this, give the audience something, help to build connection with your audience. Connection builds relationship. Relationship builds trust. Trust builds engagement, and engagement builds change. And this begins with a story. It doesn't begin with rote delivery of data, position statements, taglines. It begins with something much richer. We'll move to the next slide. That richness has a power all of its own. So there is research to show that stories are 22 times more memorable than data alone. 22 times. So if you listen to a story, you read a story, you see a story, you are 22 times more likely to remember that story, remember the message from that story, than if you've just written or read a page of data. So if we pop to the next slide, a quick quiz here for everyone. Can you remember, and we'll park the previous slide because that's probably top of mind. Can you remember any of the data points that I shared at the very beginning? And or can you remember this Veha story? Think about which one of those already may be staying with you. And if you can't remember any of those data points, don't worry. I shared them partly for this reason and partly again to set up the value of why it's so important to use storytelling to engage and connect consumers in such a busy world and in such a chaotic space. But the key to doing that well, how do you rise above? How do you become not just another white noise in this great mass of content that we're all busily producing and sharing every day? That's the next question. And so I've put together a set of storytelling sustainability storytelling principles. So we can move to the next slide and take a look at those. And a quick aside here, a quick anecdote. There's lots of ways to sort of call out the hallmarks of what a good sustainability story looks like and what it should do. But I was doing some research a couple of weeks ago that involved looking at regenerative food systems. And I found a really great set of principles for regenerative food systems. And it got me thinking about how we connect this theme of regenerating local at Sustainable Brands this year with this concept of storytelling as a springboard for connecting consumers with your sustainability initiatives in such a chaotic world. And so I have adapted these regenerative principles to align with how we might go about doing that. What does a good sustainability story look like? And it's sort of a beehive here because I'm going to go through them in sequence and we're going to look at some other examples. But I would say that all of these have equal priority, equal footing. You need an aspect of each of these in every story you create. They need to be real. I think the word authenticity gets bandied around quite a lot these days, but you do need to be real and you need to be credible. And that's where the data point comes in with this as well. So when we're talking about storytelling, we're not talking about abandoning data. Far from it. In fact, this is key to telling a good story in the sustainability space. So we saw at the beginning, if I can remind you of the data points that we looked at early on, that there's a healthy degree of skepticism. So if you're just claiming sustainability and you're not backing it up, we all know that's greenwashing and that's not going to get you very far. And in fact, could get you into serious trouble. And at the same time, we also know that if you overclaim about sustainability, this may also create mistrust with consumers. So there's a fine line that now we have to walk. And that's definitely changed in the past few years. I think because there have been some high profile stories as well in the press about companies not meeting targets or green hushing, where they're hiding targets or hiding progress towards targets and perhaps pushing targets further out, 2050, 2060 targets, things that really, you know, you're not going to have to deal with that if it's 2060. So, and not sharing progress along the way. So sort of a loss of transparency. These are things that are being covered now in the media, and these are things that are on the peripheral awareness of consumers. So again, I'm sharing that to say you've got to walk a line as you are storytelling and as you are using tales, anecdotes, etc., to engage on sustainability with your consumers. One of the things you really need to be doing is making sure that you're doing this in a real and credible way, a focused way, focused and specific way. We cannot be all things to all people. We all know this as marketers. We all know this as communicators. We all know this as brands. We cannot be all things to all people. And one story cannot cover all the things you may want to cover about your brand and your organization's sustainability practices. So you need to be specific and selective. You need to edit and curate how and what story you tell. They need to be diverse in the sense that you want to invite in other voices and perspectives. Perhaps also you want to be diverse in the way you think about what a story even is, and we'll get to that in a moment. We want to point to what's possible. This is really important. It's easy to fall into climate doom and gloom as well, but there's lots going on. There's lots of exciting things going on, new technology, new innovation. Your own company and your own brand right now, as you listen to me, may be working on an exciting piece of new technology, new material, a new way of promoting circularity, a new way of offering a service or a product out to your market. So we need to keep what's possible in our sights and remind consumers of that. And at the same time, we need to be provocative. There needs to be a call to action and a point of engagement, and it needs to be personal. So I'm going to run through some examples of what that can look like and what that does look like for several brands as well. So we're going to start on the next slide with locally connected. So back to this concept of regenerating local. I think this is really key. So in addition to pointing to what's possible, and we'll close with that, beginning by locally connecting. And this is a case of knowing your audience and putting your audience first. So this is about understanding the things that concern them, what their priorities are, and the world they are living in. So if you're going to market something about clean water, and you are in a market where, in fact, clean water, you're fortunate enough that clean water is less of an issue, and maybe instead there are there is much more concern over plastic or waste or food supply, then you need to think about those things. So this is where focus groups and consumer research really come into play. I think that if you have the capacity to engage in your target market with consumers to understand what they're thinking, not just about these big issues, but also how they're understanding some then of the more specific issues that you're probably driving initiatives around within your organization. I'm thinking of carbon, I'm thinking of plastic or moving to plastic free, I'm thinking of circularity and those types of things. You need a good handle to begin with on what your customer and what your audience is thinking. And then you need to make it personal. So if we pop to the next slide, the reason I'm sharing this is kind of an interesting one, and it's local and it's personal. So these are some ballot bins created by an agency called Hubbub, and these are in the city of Manchester in the UK. And these bins are for throwing away trash, things that cannot be landfilled or recycled. I think there's some recycling bins as well that do the same thing. And what they've done here to encourage and tackle a very localized problem of litter and waste is to create bins that are also invite you to have some personal engagement by voting. So you can see on the right-hand side, we have the Barbie movie versus the Oppenheimer movie, and you can choose which side you want to put your item into. You can see in the middle, fridge versus cupboard, and Heinz UK asking, where do you store your ketchup? You can vote in one of these bins, whether you store it in the fridge or whether you store it in the cupboard. So this is not a traditional story per se, but it's a great example of tackling a localized issue that's also a widespread issue, and doing so in a way that's personal, in a way that invites personal engagement through participation. People care about what affects them directly, and they need to care in order to engage with your brand. So if you can share in a way, present a story, offer an experience that tackles or connects with an issue that affects them directly, they then are going to engage with your brand as well. So if we move to the next slide. Also, storytelling also needs to be focused and specific. It needs to meet consumers where they are, meet your audience where they are. It can be very overwhelming for consumers if they don't understand the language you're using. I've previously used net zero, carbon positive, carbon neutral as examples of this. I think, and certainly based on research, that consumer research that I was involved in the other year, consumers don't necessarily have a good grasp. They know that means something good, or they know it means something they should be doing, but they don't really necessarily know what that means. Now, I hope the sound might work on this, because this is another video. This is an ad for NatWest Bank. And you can see here too, it's age targeted a little bit. There is certainly maybe a little bit of a younger generation target to this particular ad. But it does a very good job of walking us through. I think the link should be on the right side, hopefully, for this. If you try the right corner link, it should go through. Apologies, everyone. It was linked down there. Yeah, there it is. I don't know if the sound will work on this. Oh, okay, it's taking us to a different place. If we go down, oh, we may have to move on from this one, but I'm happy to share the link um, on follow up with anyone. The reason I highlighted that particular story was that the bank did an excellent job of explaining a very complicated concept, which is the link between finance and banking, and of course, the environment and global climate issues, and making it clear that where you put your money does have everything to do with what happens and the level of impact and influence on the environment. So they did a very good job of simplifying in a very clear, specific way, beginning with that first text question, of answering the question. And that highlights that stories should always answer the question of what your consumers want to know and not just what you want to tell them. Certainly with sustainability, it's very easy to fall into the trap of telling consumers what you, not even what you think they want to hear, but maybe you've done so much. Maybe you have so much data, maybe you have so many initiatives that what you want to do is start talking about all the things that you're doing, when in fact the first thing you need to do is understand what questions they may have. So again, I will repeatedly point back to the power and the value of doing some good audience and market research on what your particular group of consumers want to know and hear. But moving on from that, to diversity and to how you can be diverse in your thinking and your approach to sustainability storytelling. And all of these things, hence the beehive, are interlinked because, of course, when you are diversity feeds credibility as well. So this is a new initiative from Puma. This was launched earlier this year, Voices of a Regeneration. And this demonstrates how a brand can step back and listen and share along the way, storytell along the way, as they invite others in to explore and help tell their sustainability story and help drive the sustainability strategy of their organization, because that is what Puma is really doing here. And so this is a 1-year initiative that will look at how to evolve the brand as it navigates its sustainability journey by engaging the next generation's perspectives and recommendations. So Puma has invited in 4, there's only 3 in this picture, but there's 4 environmental voices and influencers to co-create and collaborate with them throughout an entire year in a very candid way, to evolve their sustainability strategy. And so we can move from there to credible and real as our next principle. And I'm just watching the clock here, so I'll pick things up a little bit. So our next principle is to be credible and real. We immediately start thinking data, certifications, standards, compliance, when you think about credibility and how you make that happen. But credibility and being real can come through in your voice as well. So this is Finisterre. This is a Cornish surf clothing company. And these are just 2 screenshots from a recent blog post that they did. And I want to highlight to you too, this is a blog post. So this kind of storytelling doesn't have to happen only within the realm of a campaign, only with the realm of pieces of social media content. but you can story tell through blogs, you can story tell through newsletters, you can story tell in presentations and in personal interactions as well. But if we pop to the next slide here, you can see that this is an accounting, so an anecdote and an account of the time this brand spent in Western Canada doing, I think, some photo shoots and developing some products, and also taking a look at conservation activities happening there. So that's one way of being real and credible. We've got another example here on the next slide. Kind of the example everyone loves to hold up, but it is a fun one. This is Oatly, the oat milk drink. And again, thinking perhaps outside the box a little bit, but sustainability stories can happen anywhere. In this case, the third box over, you can see a short story about Oatly and oat milk there, as well as delivering some very important data in a very engaging way. And of course, that is really their brand, what their brand is known for. And it is a great example. I would encourage you as well to look at their social media and website, because they do a great job with storytelling. You also want to be provocative. So if we pop over to the next slide, again, this is an example that many of you have probably seen before. Don't buy this jacket. This is Patagonia, one of the biggest outdoor outfitters in the world. And this was a campaign and a storytelling campaign that they undertook a few years ago in the US to opt out of Black Friday, which is historically the biggest consumer shopping day in the US and I think in the world now. And so this is a very provocative approach to challenging consumers' thinking, challenging their consumers' thinking, but also sending them the message at the same time about quality, durability, and the fact that they want you to buy their products once and not multiple times. Right. And then finally, we come to, I think, what is the most important piece of all of this, which is pointing to the possible. People don't need new facts. They need a new story. Change their story and change their behavior. This from Annette Simmons. I think this is the one thing I can leave you with to keep in mind as you consider how you can frame or reframe the brand story, sustainability stories you are telling in ways that will engage and connect with your consumer. So one final example on this last slide. This is Path, a water bottle company who's seeking to, I think, end the need for any other water bottle. And they have a very strong purpose and sustainability ethos. And here is an ad from them. And you can see here, this is a great way to demonstrate how to tell a different story, tell a new story, rewrite the future. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. And thank you very much for the opportunity. I know we are 4 minutes over, so I'm always happy to receive questions or have further chat by email, and you can also find me on LinkedIn.